Emotional mastery is the ability to understand, regulate, and channel emotions effectively to achieve desired outcomes, maintain composure under pressure, and respond constructively to life's challenges. So we got to be able to stop it and feel it, because most people in life are just wound up and triggered by everything bouncing around, just a ball of emotions, right? And so understand and regulate are two main things. So understand means I'm able to understand it, pause, figure out what it is, and then I regulate how I feel. Meaning I make a conscious decision versus reacting subconsciously to what's going on. Understand, regulate, and channel the emotions effectively to achieve desired outcome. Goes back to what it says, hey, I got to know what I want to get that. I maintain composure under pressure, and then I respond constructively to life's challenges. Meaning I respond constructively with a plan, with an action that gets me what I want, not how I feel. And so this is where I start to regulate the emotions and pause and some deep stuff. The second part of that, it involves a conscious awareness of your emotional states, the ability to shift from disempowering emotions to empowering ones, and the discipline to align your emotional responses with your long-term goals and values. Not realizing I'm actually the traffic too, because the guy behind me is probably triggered about me because I'm in line holding people up. To be able to sell at a high level, you have to have emotional mastery. Why? Because it's very emotional business, long sales cycle, lots of problems, lots of nuances, and we get paid to solve problems. It involves a conscious awareness of your emotional states, the ability to shift from disempowering emotions to empowering ones, and the discipline, key word there, discipline, which means I discipline my thoughts to align your emotional responses to your long-term goals and values. They push through and push through and push through. They don't actually deal and grow their emotional mastery, and so they're at constant odds with their feelings and what they are, and so eventually that brings burnout, challenges, and they can't make the pressure long term. They can get through it short term, but they sacrifice their emotional health in doing it versus just had emotional mastery. Alignment's when everything flows. You ever worked on something in real estate or in business or anything in life where everything just flows, everything becomes easy, and everything seems to work out the way it's supposed to? That's alignment. I want you guys to write down alignment's when I have things there and everything flows. And that comes back to the emotional part of how I feel and how I act, and my feelings are in alignment what I want, what I have. And so that's the key part there. What do you want? Which comes down to what? Your goal. Or I like you say the why. What's driving you in terms of that? And we'll go back to the second part in a minute, right? But before emotional mastery, before you get anywhere near there, you have to define what you want. You have to have a target in life or a goal in life, or you're going to be aimless. If I don't have the target, I end up being aimless. What's aimless mean? But people who know what they want in life and who know who they are tend to regulate their emotions much better. Why? They're clear on what they want, which means they're much more likely to make decisions based on what they want versus how they feel. The challenge for you guys is to get very specific on what you want in all 4 areas of life, right? What I want in my business, what I want in my relationships, what I want in my health and physicality, what I want from my spiritual or happiness or my being part, which is important. And that's going to align to the next part, which is going to be your values. It's important because, I'll break it down in a second why, but your values. What you guys write down for your values is your compass. What are your values? Your beliefs, right? About what? It's important. It's your worldview about the way life is, the way things should be. And so it's very important, because if my goal of what I want doesn't align with my values, what happens? I don't get it. The key part is I have to make sure I'm understanding what I want. And if I have my goal here, the good news is if I understand my values and align with that, I can go back and change what? My values, which is my worldview. And so in some cases, it may take looking back and changing your worldview to get what I actually want. What holds most people back is their worldview is not in alignment with what they want. And that could be underestimating the amount of work it takes to get something done, underestimating the amount of personal development you have to do to get to where you want to be. If you want to be more and the key part is your values must align with what you want. If you want to become more emotionally fit, personal responsibility must be at the top of your list. Personal responsibility is I signed them or I didn't sign them, period. And that's going to be our thing for Q4 here in 2026 is that execution. It happened or it didn't happen. Personal responsibility is I signed them, I didn't sign them, period. This is super important, right? To make sure you understand with that. It's difficult to change something you don't take responsibility for. You have to evaluate accountability if you want to become emotionally fit, right? And that's personal responsibility in that part, which is very, very important. And so the key part there is most people don't get what they want because they have conflicting desires. So for example, I want to be successful and sell out of real estate, but my value says I don't take full responsibility, I take partial responsibility. So my values do not align with what I want, which all of a sudden what? I'm not in alignment, which means I don't get what I want. And so it's not to have radical personal responsibility. Now, are there going to be some that slip through? Yeah, that's okay. But it's still my fault because they were somehow closable and somebody is going to list or sell them at some point. And so I have to understand of like, look, this is a key part here where like I have to have personal responsibility in every single aspect. Most people don't get what they want because they have conflicting desires like we talked about. They want to tell the truth. They want to also please others. They want to be emotionally fit but don't want to take responsibility. So I want to be successful. I want to be great at sales, but I don't take personal responsibility. You have to get better at asking better questions. Principles and laws. So for example, in business, if I follow a certain amount of laws, my business grows every single year. Makes sense? I show up, I make the dials, I make my connections every single day, I master personal responsibility, personal development, I get better at my presentation, and I keep doing that every year. What happens to my business? It goes up. But what happens is I get off the law, I quit developing personally, I quit making the phone calls, I quit having the sustainability. What happens to my business? It goes down, right? It's a great example of like, here's an example of principles. I have to understand principles are also the part of this alignment to get mastery. So here's the key part. That's the key thing with that. Next part, aligned with the principles and laws, is actions. And so to have the emotional mastery, we're talking about alignment, right? We're talking about my goals and whys, my values, my principles, and my actions. And so these are all obviously building on each other, right? But it's going to be very hard to become emotionally fit without being involved in emotions and understanding how to regulate emotions, right? The number one reason we don't do things that we know we need to do comes down to one thing: human emotion. I know I need to do it. I know I make phone calls. I know I should be at the huddle. I know I should do all these things. But what lets us off the hook is human emotions. This is important. This is the whole reason I'm teaching this right now. The number one reason that we don't do the things we know we need to do comes down to one thing, and that thing is human emotion. And so that's the key part where I have to go from anything else. I'm driven on principles versus feelings. The key part of emotional mastery is understanding alignment with these is what allows me to have emotional mastery in this part. The reason we're not more disciplined is because we allow human emotion to make decisions for us instead of principles. Successful people is not they don't feel things, it's that they do not let their feelings control them or what they do. Successful people don't allow the feelings to control them what they do. They just do it anyway based on principles. Do I do it based on principle first or emotion first? If I live based on principle first, the emotions are really good. But if I live on emotions first, my life tends to be really bad because I'm not principle driven. So I knew I wanted to work out. I want to be fit and healthy. All of a sudden I have a specific goal about what I want to be. All of a sudden I'm being more driven by my values, which is I'm going to show up no matter what happens. Right? I know my principles, I just got to be there every single day. I can't miss it because I have self-accountability and personal accountability to other people. And now my actions align with it for a certain amount of time. All of a sudden I'm becoming into alignment. And what happens? I become in flow. And there's no question if I show up or not. I'm just there either way, and it doesn't really matter. Judgment is the enemy of influence. You cannot influence that in which you judge. Judgment is the enemy of influence. Yep, and one thing to take this deeper, one way to regulate the emotion is to observe the emotion, not judge it. I get triggered, then what happens to the relationship? I'm out of alignment, what happens to my ability to influence? It's out of alignment, right? So the antithesis of judgment is connection, right? Same thing with your own judgment. For your emotional mastery, you have to understand that, hey, look, I got to make sure I'm constantly getting out of judgment. I'm not judging. Naturally want to judge, and you get conditioned to judge, but I want to step out of judgment and get into curiosity because that allows me to do what? To understand, to have empathy, to have different judgment. But here's the thing. I want you guys to write this down. You cannot always control your first thought, but you can control your second. What do most people do? They go with their first thought, the first thing, the first anger, their first reaction, their first resentment, right? Growth is training the subconscious mind. Growth is training the subconscious mind. So the conscious mind trains the subconscious mind on how to respond emotionally. Just write her down right there. The conscious mind trains the subconscious mind on how to respond emotionally. First step to mastery, number one, pause. Super important. And obviously we talked last week about the first phase is awareness, but pause. There's one thing you get out of this next 4 weeks is just pause, right? And so that's the key thing I want you to understand is like, hey, you have to be willing to pause and go through that part of that process, which I think is very, very important. First step is to pause. Deal falls through, home inspection issue, I want to pause. So most people just want the dopamine of being heard or say they took responsibility, but a different action must happen. And so we must master the discipline of thoughts. Must master the discipline of thoughts. And that comes through questions we talked about. And it's hard to teach some of this deep stuff, but I'm trying to layer it in for you the right way. And so disciplined thoughts means, hey, we want to have to understand, I got to understand the triggers, right? Be aware of the triggers. And so we'll talk about this, what the steps are in a minute. But first step is discipline the thoughts. Why? Because the discipline of the thoughts leads to the second part. What do you think thoughts drives? Not quite actions yet, but in a minute it does. Emotion. So the second phase of this is I discipline my emotion. Because the thought drives what? Right? Which is also my story. And so if we can learn to discipline the thought, we can learn to discipline the emotion. And how do we do that? We have to ask better questions. And so the thought process comes from, hey, these sellers suck or these buyers suck and they, aren't good to sign. And it comes to asking myself a better question, right? Which is, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently?
What if I suck?
Yeah, well, first step, what if I suck at this? How do I know that? You're going to measure it. And that has no emotion to it. Right? I can feel like all the things are bad, but when I look at my numbers and they're not good, what does that tell me? I'm the one that's not good. Right? And so I have a baseline to compare that to, and somebody else, and I have leadership that I can bring that to, which makes a big difference. So I want you guys to write this down. Thoughts create feelings. It's the first part. When? If you want to change behavior, what's the absolute best way to do it? What is it?
Right after he does it.
During the act, right? It doesn't happen the first time. It happens until ... What do you think that answer is?
Can you master it?
You get a better outcome. How long do I know I need to do it until I get a better outcome? And all of a sudden, that finally reinforces that. But I have to keep doing it until I get the better outcome. So this is something that takes a long time to learn. Some people have been negative or have triggered emotions or haven't had emotional mastery for 20, 30, 40, 50 years in some cases. When you act in a way that you always have, that way doesn't serve you, you must pause. Awareness. The first phase of this is awareness. I need to make sure I recognize, understand my emotions and their triggers. Recognize, understand my emotions and triggers. You can't change something you're not aware of. Change happens by putting awareness where awareness doesn't normally go. Change happens by putting awareness where awareness doesn't normally go. And how do I do that? After every meeting, appointment, whatever it is, you have to ask yourself, how did I do? How did I respond? How could I have done better? What are some of the things I'm not aware of that I could have done better? And I want to make sure I recognize, understand my emotions and their triggers, which is very, very important. Number one, how did I do? How to respond? How could I have done better? What are some of the things that I'm not aware of that I could have done better? And I want to make sure I understand what triggers you, and then what I want to do. Have a better response to those things or a complete removal of them. That's the key part. Number two, regulation. That's managing emotional reactions to maintain clarity and focus. Managing emotional reactions to maintain clarity and focus. So manage to maintain clarity and focus, right? Whenever you want to react, know that you're giving up data. Smart people sit back and collect data to make a good response. The one that talks the most is typically the one that's the most insecure, right? The one that's sitting back gathering data is going to be the one that comes and makes the best decision at the end. Third piece of this, after regulation, again, that definition is managing emotional reactions and maintain clarity. So at that point, I'm just getting clarity and focus. Third piece, this is where it starts to get good. 3, discipline. I'm choosing a response that serves the goal rather than reacting impulsively. So my discipline piece is I choose a response that serves the goal rather than impulsively reacting. Has anyone ever had the desire to be right? I have, right? And so that's in business with clients. It's with our relationship. They say they don't want to be right, but what does your behavior say? Only right. You have an argument with your spouse. You have this thing. And most people, 9 out of 10 times, what do they want in a disagreement with their spouse? The problem is your behavior says otherwise. Your behavior and reaction says what? Only right. And so if I'm in a goal in my relationship that wants to be amicable, deep connection that served each other in a safe place to have a great relationship, but my behavior says every single time I got to be right, what does that tell the other person? That they're wrong. And so ultimately that does not create a deeper connection. And so my desire to be right destroys my ultimate desire of what? Deep peace and connection. And so the first step of that is to understand awareness of my behavior. And when that trigger comes up for me to desire to be right, and it doesn't have to be angry, that's the crazy part. This doesn't have to be an anger emotion. This could be just a desire for me to be right. Well, now I got to regulate that and say, hey, what if I choose empathy instead of being right? Because I want a better outcome, which is what? a deeper connection with my spouse. But that's when the bigger goal, which has to have clarity on what my goal is, serves me at that point where now I can deploy a different emotion than the one that naturally comes out. And that's emotional mastery. That's having a deep connection relationship. And I struggled with this a long time, right? I'm a leader. I'm a D personality. I'm an alpha type personality. And so I constantly got to be right for an ego standpoint, but that destroys a deep connection and rapport relationship. Does that make sense? Same thing with your clients in business, right? And so that's the key thing. Would I rather be right in business or do I want to win the deal? Make sense? And so this is where I want you guys to get to. This is what we're going to work on the next 4 weeks is like, how do I get so good at choosing the right emotion in the time period when I don't feel like doing that emotion? And the first step of that is being awareness of like all the shit you do and the way you react, and I regulate that emotion real time, but then I choose to deploy something in that exact second that gets me what I want versus how I feel. And that's where mastery comes in. That's where the whole reason I'm teaching this, right? The next one is empowerment. Empowerment. So number 4 is empowerment. Empowerment is where I leverage emotion as a source of energy and motivation. So leverage, empowerment, definition. Leveraging emotions as source of energy and motivation. And here's a definition that's really good. Empowerment is where emotions no longer use you, but you use them instead. This is where I want you guys to get to, and this will change your whole life. Forever. Empowerment is where emotions no longer use you, but you use them instead. I can be frustrated internally with a client, but instead I choose to deploy empathy to maintain the relationship and the connection to have what? Influence. I can be in my relationship with my spouse and be angry, but I can choose to deploy empathy, which is what? What does empathy mean? Understanding, right? Understanding what it is in that scenario to help understand them at a deeper level so I can do what? Get the outcome that I want. I can deploy empathy to understand what? Where they're coming from to see their part of view so we can get to an outcome that's beneficial for both. I can want to be right, but instead of being right, I can ask a deeper question to understand where that person's coming from. Empowerment is where you start to deploy the proper emotions. And the last one here, in this part, there's 2 more, is intelligence. Intelligence is the ability to understand and deploy the proper emotion in order to receive desired result. So here's my discipline, right? I'm choosing responses. Empowerment is not being controlled by the emotion, but me controlling the emotion based on what I want. And then the intelligence piece is actively understanding and choosing the right emotion. That's linked up with result. So here is the ability to understand and deploy the proper emotion to achieve desired result. And what's that example of? This is called meeting people where they're at. I meet them where they're at. This is where high-level emotional IQ comes in. This is how people like you no matter what you have going on. This is how clients like you. They trust you, understand you. No matter what type, I must be able to do what? Meet them where they're at, which I think is very, very important for us to understand. The next few weeks is resilience. Resilience. I bounce back quickly from setbacks by staying emotionally grounded. I'm not emotionally triggered. Deal goes sideways, have a crazy client, backs out the day of closing. These are things that are setbacks emotionally for a lot of people. And so now, instead of me being down for 2 weeks, emotionally what happens? Now I'm down for 2 minutes. Mastery comes from practice, and we talked about here in having these steps that I go through: awareness, regulation, discipline, choosing the right one. But I have to be aware of my triggers and my emotional fortitude. And I go from 2 hours to 2 minutes. Here's the deal. In business, 2 weeks and 2 minutes in business time is a lifetime in business. If I get triggered by everything and I'm down for 2 weeks, every time it goes sideways and something bad happens and a client screws me over or whatever it is, versus 2 minutes, guess what happens to my year at the end? Massively different. Because I've had emotional mastery allows me to bounce back quicker by having to understand resilience and knowing what the plan is. And so that's the key part with that. It's about not dwelling on something. Not dwelling on the issue. Dwelling, which is, dwelling on the issue. Dwelling has 0 ROI. Nothing, right? Dwelling, 0 ROI. Meaning it doesn't get me anything. And so I want to make sure I can deploy the right response and the right emotion to get me back where I want overall with that. Mastering the most specifically what?
Emotions.
Emotional intelligence. They have the ability to bounce back. They just do it without worrying about it. They have bad things happen, what do they do? Get right back on the horse. And that's the difference between people who are super smart that don't make it and people that are not that smart that make it really high. They have the ability to have resilience and bounce back quickly, which allows them to make sure that they can overcome and have things in their life. And the quicker you do that, the more intelligent you look. Right? It's not about intelligence, it's about recommitting regardless of how you feel. The faster they recommit and take action, the faster you come back from setback. And so what's my goal with all this? Is to increase your conscious level, right? It's about you guys understanding that you can deploy the right emotion in what you do and how you do it to allow yourself to get what you want versus how you feel.